Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain. I want to welcome you to this presentation on 3 B2B integration use cases you will see in 2024, presented by Clio. One quick reminder, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So, all supply chains are predictably unpredictable, especially when it comes to integration. With rising expectations by trading partners and more applications being added to the technology stack, it becomes imperative to identify integration gaps within core revenue processes, such as load, tender to invoice, or order to cash. Today's session will showcase these challenges with the goal of helping you to provide better customer experience, future-proof your B2B integration strategy, and give you a leg up on the competition. So let me introduce our speaker for today. Frank Kenny is Senior Director of Industry Solutions with Clio. A former Gartner analyst and current market evangelist and strategy director, Frank is widely credited as the creator of the term Managed File Transfer, or MFT, and was the first to write about and discuss its modern architecture, platform, and use cases. Previously, Frank served more than 10 years as a research director at Gartner, where he defined the MFT, B2B gateway, SOA governance, and cloud service brokerage markets. So with that, let me turn it over for the presentation to Frank Kenny. Frank, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Supply Chain Brain, for hosting and everything that you guys continue to do. Thank you for having me and spending some time. So let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about just some of the B2B scenarios that we're going to see in 2024 and some of the things that are perplexing many of us today and certainly have been through some of the strangeness that we've seen over the last few years. So the four things that we're going to look at today, we know that the supply chain is perfectly and predictably unpredictable. So we're going to get at that. Data is not equal to information, and it's not equal to useful information. And we're entering an era of what I call the postmodern transportation management system. And we'll talk what that means and what that may mean to you. And then finally, whenever you're dealing with your suppliers and you're dealing with your customers and you're dealing with your buyers, regardless of if you're logistics or if you're a shipper or if you're someone else inside that supply chain, there is a massive amount of expectations that, frankly, we're not capturing. And that's going to change your business. So let's get into it. Whenever I start a presentation around the supply chain, I always start and level set with this idea that there's this pendulum that exists, right? There's a pendulum that goes from shippers having power to the transportation guys having power and then back and forth. And we see this in cycles. And so every presentation, certainly every quarter, I kind of update the animation to say, who has the power? Who has the pricing power? Who has the buying power? And so let's show you that. It didn't hedge up. In 2021, for instance, it was way over to the other side. And it is still very much the shippers have the power. The shippers have a lot of the buying power. And we see that when we look at what the spot rates are. We see that when we look at the market rates, the cost of transportation. It's kind of like a spiral that we're having a hard time getting out of. When we entered this weirdness of a logistics space in, I'm going to say, around Q2 of 2022, and here we are coming out of Q4 of 2023, the reality is that we're running out of runway. And what that basically means is that many of the transportation companies that made a lot of money during that big e-commerce and fulfillment push of 2020 going into 2021, they put away a lot of that money, but we're running out of runway. It just isn't a lot of that money left, a lot of those resources left. And so if you look at a snapshot here that I took, we've got something like 373,000 carriers that exist, about 30,000 brokers. And by the way, that's an enormous amount of brokers, especially when you go back 10 years ago and you start to look at the brokerage being more of a boutique or cottage industry. just a ton of them. The freight forwarders at 18, 1900, that doesn't really change just because of the nature of their business. What we are seeing, and I think it's very helpful to start to see, is you see how we come from the last freight recession and we move up into this world that is post-COVID. Tremendous amount of capital out there, a tremendous amount of spending, a tremendous amount of volume, and everybody just starts to invest in these freight companies. And when you can't buy trucks, you start to become the middleman because you can find capacity. There's just so much business out there. Well, we have started to see, since this freight recession happened, a loss of a lot of companies just going out of business, a lot of motor carriers just moving out of the business. And unfortunately, until we see enough of that, I want you to take a look at these numbers. When we were at the height of it in between 2020 and 2021, we added so much capacity to the market that we're now in a position where we've got to take that capacity out because we're not matching that capacity with consumption. Everything that's happened, everything with interest rates and everything with the economy, and then the global wars that are happening, and all of the different political environments. What ends up happening is that there's just so much uncertainty, and so now we've got to pull that capacity out of the market. So we're not going to see anything substantial, certainly not in the first quarter, maybe even parts of the second quarter. But I do anticipate that we'll start to see somewhat of a recovery on the back end of 2023. But what that means is you're going to look at a lot more exits out of the market. And that's kind of where we see freight at. If you look at FreightWaves, one of the more powerful voices in the market, you can take a look at the contract load acceptance volume, right? And this is a metric that's used to see, well, what is the demand? And we see some bumps here, but it's just not going to be anything that's going to make a tremendous impact on capacity. And this is a better way of looking at what I've just said. Again, if you take a look at the volume or the demand, which is in the blue, and you take a look at the amount of carriers and trucking authorities, which is in the white, that big space that exists there, we've got to make up for it. We need these two lines to get closer together. And so outside of a massive stimulus from governments, which I don't think is going to happen, we need that drop in capacity. We need people to exit out of the market. It's a very hard thing, but this is the kind of correction that we get used to seeing. And although this has been a little longer and a little bit more unpredictable, that stability comes and we'll be back to some type of a cycle and being able to predict these things. So the second topic I want to talk about, we're collecting a lot of data out there, folks. But the data is not turning into the information. And what data is turning into the information, hence artificial intelligence, machine learning, and ChatGPT, and some of those other things, it's not really useful information. It's not really information that we can help with. And I like to, whenever I talk about this topic, I like to think about, well, okay, so what are we really talking about? Well, if you think about the SETI, right? And SETI is the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I think way back in the 90s, where the request was to download an application or download a program, and you run it on your computer, and when you're asleep and your computer has access to the World Wide Web and the internet, early cable type of connections, university students, you would give some of that processing power to kind of translate or try to look for some of the trends to analyze the massive amount of data that's being collected as we search for life. And this is kind of what's happening. We have a massive amount of data. We're starting to get the computing power to do something and to understand it and analyze it, but many companies just don't know what's being analyzed. So I'm going to point to a recent survey from one of the vendors in the real-time transportation visibility space, right? One of the leaders in that market, and they did a survey, and they asked the question, all right, so everybody wants real-time. What does real-time mean? And real-time visibility, it turns out, doesn't just mean real-time visibility. It means different things to different entities, because everyone has a different stake and a different wantingness of how to use that data and how to leverage that data to be better at what they do. Some folks think that it just means alerts. Your truck is here, your ship is here, your cargo is here. That's the consumerization of business to business, right? We get to see all of that when we buy something during this holiday season. You get to see all of that when you buy something, and you get the updates. Your package is 5 blocks away. Don't know that I need to know that, but I guess it's helpful to someone. Much more helpful that your package is sitting outside your door, then I can run up to my door and take it before someone else does. That kind of stuff is very, very helpful, but it's not going to be too helpful if I'm still 3 or 4 days away. And so we've got all of this location, but then some folks are just using it and feeding it into some type of database to possibly pull up some analytics. Where do we always see traffic, or where do we always see congestion, or what time of the day should we not be pointing our routing guides, or not be pointing our GPSs in this way? Sometimes that information comes from good old-fashioned phones that truckers are driving. Sometimes that information comes from electronic logging devices that are built onto the trucks. Sometimes it's other IoT types of devices. And most of the time, even though if you see the bottom here, you see 24/7 shipment monitored by a dedicated team, 27%, I'm going to tell you that I don't know that I quite believe that stat. And the reason why I don't believe that stat is I go to too many organizations that have these big bullpens of people picking up the phone and saying, "Where are you?" and then entering it into some type of database, or entering it into some type of transportation management system, or some type of warehouse management system. Where is? So there's a lot more people for a lot of different reasons that are involved in this process. And so my point is that we have different things that we're doing with real-time shipment visibility data. We have different organizations, different personas, different divisions, and different things that are going to be done with that data. And it hasn't quite washed out yet of how to do it in a standardized way. I take another look at this same data cut, and this is asking people a little bit more in detail. And again, I think this is a very genius question by the Thai folks. Kudos to you guys there. But so what are the things that you're looking at, and what is the context that you're looking at them? So I'm looking at them for real-time tracking. Sometimes I'm just taking it and putting it into a database for passive stuff, and then other people have no idea why they're collecting it. That's a very, very scary thought, because there have been tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, both invested in a lot of these companies and also invested in the technologies to collect this. So lots of real-time things being used. But if you look at what I think is interesting, things like temperature tracking and humidity tracking, which are not being tracked in real time, not sure why, but that are being tracked in passive. We believe that a lot of that is being done because scorecarding and understanding and meeting the expectations of your customer, whether your customer be a shipper or manufacturer or a distribution center, or your customer actually being the people who are using your trucks, the people who are using your warehouse to store their things or carry their things. It's for your customers. So we're going to keep an eye on that, because we think that that has the opportunity to be something really big and somewhat of a subsegment of a market all in its own. And finally, people asking, okay, so why are you tracking it? We know how you're tracking it. We have an idea of who. We have an idea of what you think it is, but what is your what's driving you to use all of these tools? What's driving you to see where things are? When I order something, and especially this time of the year, I like to say to myself, well, I need to make sure that the presents I'm getting for my family are going to arrive in time. Don't want them to arrive Christmas Eve, because I've got to attempt to wrap these things, because I probably too cheap to pay for wrapping from the company. So I'm going to do it myself. So I want them to arrive around the 23rd. That's what I'm tracking. And it's exactly that. I need to know if there are delays. I need to know if you can find me at my big box retailer looking for replacement gifts because my gifts won't be on time. But then quickly behind it are the fees, specifically the detention and demurrage fees that you're going to see, especially when you're doing a lot of importing, whether it's the land borders or it's the ports in California, the ports in New Jersey, the ports in Texas, the ports in Georgia, etc. And then what's happening to these things. So my point is that this data that we're getting, this information that we're able to pull out of it, we don't know yet if it is useful on any level. And I want you to consider that. And you need to consider that because more than likely you're going to be buying multiple solutions and you're going to have to start to tie those things together, right? And so, whoops, I hit the wrong button. So let's talk about the transportation management system. And our friends at Gardner publish this taxonomy of a transportation management system. Which is used to help track capacity, that's used to help track, well, what assets do I have here? What loads can I sell? Who can I sell it to? And all those things. And traditionally, we've seen a transportation management system have most, if not all, of these capabilities. But something interesting started happening in the 2021, 2022 timeframe. It's almost as if someone took a stick of dynamite, stuck it into the TMS, and blew the whole thing up. And of course, nothing gets permanently destroyed. It starts to come back, and it starts to come back has different things. Some of the TMSs that this has happened to have come back and are currently sitting under the best use cases for things like multimodal domestic TMSs. Those are the TMSs that you see a lot of the shippers use, which end up, for private and dedicated fleets, ends up being somewhere around 50% of that market. And then you have a set of vendors that are very carrier centric. So if you are asset based, there are a set of vendors and a set of technologies that you're going to use. And by the way, you're going to use and you're going to need to integrate with other parts of your ecosystem. We'll talk about that more in a moment. And then because of the rise of 3PLs and the wantingness to outsource some big chunk of the logistics process, because of the rise of the brokerages and the freight forwarders, there's a set of transportation management systems that lend themselves well to that. Now, you could argue that some of these guys are more legacy, some of these guys are more modern than others, but at the end of the day, TMSs are starting to have different faces and starting to talk to different types of companies. And dependent on what you do or how you start to combine businesses, whether you decide that you're a carrier with assets, but you want a brokerage, or maybe that's what you did when times were good, or if you are a manufacturer and you're recognizing that there are some efficiencies that you can get from starting to manage some of the logistics process yourself, you're going to start to make your choices based on what is the position and what is the balance that these transportation management systems have. And what you're going to see is that most of these companies have offerings in different places. So you have to ask. But I talked about the TMS just blowing up. And so all those little lines in that taxonomy ends up, they have to go someplace. They have to exist because it's capability that we need to look at. And so here's a list of vendors that I see as being in the ecosystem, right? That have to exist in the ecosystem of transportation management systems and the companies, the logistics companies that they use. And some ones that may be asset-based or maybe more domestic or shipper-based or maybe 3PL-based are going to use multiple vendors from these categories or are going to use one or two depending on what they need. And so when you start to think about, well, okay, Frank, you've just shown me a whole bunch of vendors. You just did an eye chart, right? But what does that mean? Well, it turns out that when you start to look at these domain categories, these things that we saw in the taxonomy of a transportation management system, like visibility, like fleet management, yard management, fraud detection, things to get away from double brokering. There's some great vendors that are doing some work there, or dock operations and freight matching. Those are starting to become these one-offs that you need to integrate into your transportation management system. So where integration was a luxury that only the larger companies had, now that the transportation management systems are being consumed primarily via the cloud as offered as a service, the need to start to integrate other cloud services or integrate some on-premise services becomes incredibly important. And that's where integration starts to play into the picture. Specifically, what we think about is ecosystem integration. And regardless of where you choose to get it, you should be making that a core part of your strategy. So this era of postmodern transportation management system is going to require an ecosystem integration platform to start to tie together all of these different applications from the ecosystem of a transportation management system and bring that back into your TMS, as well as bring it back into your partners, whether that be via X12, whether that be via JSON, and you're going to use APIs, a lot of CSVs and flat file things that are happening, but you want to start to look at these extensions of your TMSs and look at them as being integrated through an ecosystem integration platform, right? So you can choose your style of integration, your approach to integration, and you can start to tie together the pieces that you want to tie together. And so finally, I go back to, this is a chart that I just absolutely love. Before I started at Gardner many moons ago, this is something that I totally embraced. And this is some of the segmentation around how the X12 committee started to put together EDI and started to put together, EDI references these business processes that I should follow that are a combination of best practices and what most people in the market are doing. So when the question became, what things should we make EDI? Everybody had different ideas. And the X12 steering committee, in a very genius way, said that, no, let's not concentrate. Let's not concentrate on the processes themselves. Let's start to figure out the domains and the areas of the business that they live. So whether it's the marketing, the product development part, right? There's some processes that live there. The actual ordering, so the sales part, processes that live there. The fulfillment or the logistics part. The financial domain. How do I bill? How do I charge? How do I make sure I'm getting paid? I'm not doing this for free. And then also the IT part, because if I'm going to start to digitize all of this stuff, I need someone that's going to support it. What we have found is that integration technology, whether that integration technology is just piecing together your partners via EDI or some other type of a manner, these technologies have matured in that same way. If you look at just doing EDI, there's a ton of technologies, or there used to be a ton of technologies that allowed you to take something and transform it into something else. And you called it an 850 for a purchase order, or a 204 for tendering a load. And then you had companies that recognized the maturity of what happens when we start to piece together the business processes, even at a micro flow. So procure to pay, or order to cash, or load tender to invoice. But the grail is to understand what are the expectations that we have all throughout the process, because these things are connected. And I believe that when it comes to how we look at the supply chain, we need to start to look at things holistically. We've matured. Just the same way that this is an organization, all of these things from the standpoint of supply chain, whether it be how do I market, and how do I order, and how do I fulfill, and how do I charge, and how do I manage and support, they're all the same thing. So I want everybody to kind of sit up and lean in for me, right? Because I think this is probably one of the most important things that I have to say. An order is just another way, or an earlier way, of looking at some inventory instruction. An order that someone buys is just an earlier version of, hey, pull this off of the shelf and put it into a box, which is just an earlier version of, hey, put this on a truck and take it someplace, which is nothing but an earlier version of, hey, charge for it, send them an invoice. An order and inventory instructions and the loads, the load tender and the invoice are just the life cycle of this thing you're selling. And that thing could be widgets and hammers and nails, or that thing could be capacity on a truck or warehouse space. It all washes out. And so we have to start to get some type of visibility, some type of convergence that exists, right? And so this idea of supply chain convergence, and that's something that some of the major analyst firms are talking about. Let's just say, with everything on the screen, let's just say that what if we can break down these silos and we can have a common idea of the linkage between an order, between inventory, between the loads, and between the invoice? How much easier would your life be? How much easier would it be to reconciliate? How much easier would it be to give your buyers, your customers, a superior experience when it comes to doing business with you? So this idea of supply chain convergence becomes one of the things that we are clearly articulating and we clearly see as something that companies want to achieve. I think the key thing is that you're not going to buy technology from maybe a TMS vendor and a WMS vendor. You get it from the same vendor because you're always going to have pieces outside of your ecosystem. Take a look at those extensions or those add-ons or whatever you want to call them. So it's going to be important that you take an approach, and we believe it's an ecosystem integration platform that's going to start to weave these things together, that's going to start to give you true visibility. Finally, there's this idea of expectations. And let me take you through it because I think it's important. We've spent a lot of time and through the history of integration, and specifically B2B integration, and how do people do business electronically, and how do they exchange purchase orders and all of those things. We spent a lot of time just in getting the stuff there, right? And if you remember all of the AS2 stuff that happened in the early 2000s, and how big of a market and how big of those expectations were to have an AS2 compliant or an SFTP compliant type of technology to be able to do business. We've done that. We've handled that. Congratulations. Most of the people who are listening to my voice today have done a good job at getting those and managing those. And we've moved into syntax. So we understand what our partners' purchase orders look like, and what those load tenders look like, and how they should be represented as either X12 documents or JSON documents or XML documents, whatever the case is. We're even starting to capture and digitize the process and how we do things and what are the expectations. In doing that, once we've done that, we kind of pivot and we start to think about, well, how can I see what's going on? How can I control what's going on? Well, I submit to you that the next great frontier is managing my partner's expectations. And the funny thing is that we always should have been managing our expectations, but we don't sometimes define what those expectations are and what those expectations aren't. But as many of you understand, your customers are starting to put scorecards and KPIs and SLAs in place for you to manage. So understanding and managing expectations of your customers are top of the line and is a top tier requirement for you to grow your ecosystem, for you to scale and grow your business. So capture them, and start to enforce them and hold yourself accountable. And so expectations is the last big thing that we expect for folks to talk about next year. Bob.
Fantastic, Frank. Thank you. What a great presentation. Really got into some detail and some crucial understanding of how this is all evolving. Good stuff. I now have the privilege of asking you a few questions for the panel portion of our presentation. And while we're doing that, audience members, please remember that we are going to leave time at the end for audience Q&A. So go ahead and indicate or submit those questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. But first, my turn. Okay, Frank. So we talked about the lack of balance between capacity and demand. How will capacity ultimately decrease to balance out with current freight volume and pull this freight market out of its recession? How's that going to happen?
Well, great question, Bob. There are two chains of thinking, right? There's a massive stimulus that governments are going to give people, thousands of dollars, and they're going to spend. And because they're going to spend, that's going to increase what they're buying, and that's going to increase demand. It's probably not going to happen that way. Unfortunately, what we're going to see is what we've been seeing for the last year and a half. We're going to see bankruptcies. We're going to see acquisitions. We're going to see people just parking their trucks and turning over their leases, or just parking their trucks and selling them. That's where we're going to see the capacity come out of the market. Mm-hmm. Remember, most of the market are small mom and pop trucks, mom and pop shops. So that's the part that hurts, and that's the part that's going to be very, very painful. But we need to see decently sized companies move out of the market and exit out of the market in order for us to see any type of substantial and meaningful change to capacity.
We've already seen some of that pain, but we're going to see more. And thank you for that. Okay, so given that we've seen two of the larger technology and so-called heavy logistics companies fail recently, is leading with technology still a viable option?
Leading with technology is always going to be a viable option. And that's because when you digitize a process, Bob, when you create a way of repeating a process in an automated fashion, you get predictability, you get consistency. And that is the baseline. When you get predictability and consistency, you can then better forecast your business. You can scale. No scale happens without predictability and consistency. And it kind of just makes sense. My suggestion is that you cannot get to the predictability and the consistency you want without automation. I also understand that we are starting to see very recently that this idea of having humans still in the process is incredibly important. And we believe that we can do both. We believe that we could have both conversations, that there's still a human element, but this is where we come back to useful information. There's still a human element that can make the decisions, that can give you that customer service, which is the reason why people want to do business with you at a premium. We believe that that could happen, but the technology isn't going away. And in many cases, people have to start to double down on it because it's the only way you're going to scale your business, but do so with intuitive and modern technology that's going to give the humans in the process, the humans in your organization, a way to strut their stuff and show true differentiation.
I love the way you put it. You said data is not information. I think that's a really interesting observation. I hadn't ever heard it put quite that way, but it's a very insightful observation. Okay, so looks like inventories maybe are back under control. Can we assume that means that retailers and buyers have higher levels of confidence in their supply chains right now?
I think so. As we just recently looked at some of the beginning of some of the earnings from a lot of the major retailers across the board, with the exception of one or two, inventories are down. And that's a very, very good thing. And it doesn't mean that people have just bought out all that stuff, although lots of Christmas sales this year. What that does mean is that we are getting to a point where when so much of what we consume is actually imported from, places in Asia and places in South America and places in Central Asia and more so the things that we're exporting going into Europe and going back into Asia. We're starting to understand and we're starting to build exceptions, what to do if there is a holiday in Asia, and how do we compensate for that, and how do we get our inventory How do we keep our inventory at a level where we know that if there's a rush, we can do something about it, but we can also replenish. So,
Right.
so Bob, I talk about inventory, but I probably should be saying it from the standpoint of replenishment. We feel confident in our ability to replenish inventory as opposed to, I don't know when that next shipment is going to come. That's a combination of where we sit with capacity and our ability to get room on ships and to get room on trains and to get room on trucks. But it's also a combination of the massive investment that we've seen in technology to, again, give us that predictability and consistency
Yeah.
from supply chain companies.
As you put it, predictable unpredictability. I mean, you can't predict everything. Certainly, you know when a peak season is coming, but you
Yes,
sure as heck don't know when a major disease is going to lock down the entire planet. So,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay, so there have been some recent surveys. They are highlighting how dependent many companies have become on metrics that have been taken from logistics processes. As an example, so-called real-time transportation visibility platforms, the acronym RTTVP, but still looks like past real-time of tracking the data frequently underused. So how and when do you expect to see that change?
I think that there are far too many vendors that are in the space that are etching out their small fiefdoms in the things that they do really, really well. So I believe that you'll see a consolidation of those vendors. And so a vendor that may offer us a set of robust tools to help drivers and dispatchers may build in some of the capability to be able to better make appointments or schedule appointments or give location. So I think that you'll start to see suites of products that kind of come together. The lack of any type of standardization. Well, what do you call status update? In X12 world, that's a 214, but in JSON, it's a whole bunch of different things. I believe that we're going to see that. And that demand is going to come from these, especially the logistics folks that are saying, hey, hold on, wait, you want me to support 4 or 5 of these guys because they did a better job at selling to shippers. So we're going to see that shakeup. We're going to see that market consolidation. I'm not sure if I believe that the transportation management systems are going to just start buying a lot of these guys. I don't think that that's going to happen because there's some independence that needs to happen. But this is where we continue to talk about the ecosystem integration platform, because if we're not going to get this massive suite of products and my TMS now becomes big again, and we're going to see all of these individual, we need ways to quickly tie those in, to quickly snap those things in. And I'll just point everybody back to what we saw with e-commerce. And certainly we saw it with e-commerce from the, everywhere from 2011 all the way into 2022, where we just kind of talk about 2 vendors and we talk about one more than we talk about 2. There was a clear winner in that e-commerce marketplace type of space, where that was where everyone invested in the early 2010s, et cetera. I believe we'll see something the same way with the same scope happen.
Interesting. Okay. So, we started to see government weighing in on certain implicit processes in transportation, such as remedies for slow paying freight brokers. Do you think 2024 is going to bring more oversight?
I think there has to be. And I think where that's coming from, Bob, is there's a lot of questions. And for instance, the F4A, which is the Federal Aviation Administration Administrative Act, right? So it's 4 A's and it's something like that. And what that basically, the big part of that is how much is a broker liable for the things that they carry or the things that they sub out to carry. And unfortunately, we've had 2 incidents with 2 major brokerages. And in one case, an appellate court found, that one of those brokers guilty and liable. And another appellate court found in a totally different case, another broker that was kind of the same, they found them not liable. And so once you get things at that appellate level, and we've seen this certainly over the last 2 years, when you get things that are confusing at that appellate level, and now you start to have entities like the Supreme Court having to come in lieu of legislation.
So you think that'll be clarified in the year ahead? We'll get to a higher court. We'll get more consistency on broker liability.
Yes, absolutely, Bob. I believe so. And what that means is, because it's even an option, because this is even a question, we're seeing a mad rush of brokers and carriers starting to look at what is the financial impact, and what does that mean for my bond, and what does that mean for insurance, and what does that mean for liability. So we already see that rush on those types of companies, which means more technology, which means more opportunity. But yes, I believe that we're going to see something happen at that level. Because remember, if the Supreme Court says we're not going to hear this case, that implicitly says something.
Yeah, it doesn't clear things up, that's for sure. Okay, so shippers right now at least seem to have a certain amount of leverage with regard to freight rates, but I don't think we've seen large numbers of them take advantage of that position. Why not?
I think it's kind of like the classic, oh, no. All the shippers are saying, we remember 2020 and 2021. We remember when we couldn't find a truck. We got to a point, Bob, that if you were just carrying everyday household goods in boxes and pallets, there was a 1 in 4 chance that when you asked for a truck, there was none available. And it was even worse when you think about refrigerated goods. It was something like 40% of the request for a refrigerated truck was declined. And so now that the market has kind of gone topsy-turvy, there's still the remembrance of, you know what? I'm not going to really stick it to them heavily, because anyone that's been doing this for a while, and it seems most people have, understand that this thing is all cycles. And so when the cycles return, we'll start to see some of those favors repaid. And that's, I think, that's been very exceptional from the shippers' standpoint. And I talk to shippers every day, all day. And one of the things that's very interesting is how proactive they are at, no, we need to manage the relationship. We know that these are our partners. They're not serving us. And so they need to eat as well. And
Sure.
that's something that's amazing. And it's very heartening to see. And I think it will be repaid in spades once the freight market gets over this hump and starts to balance out and starts to shift the power to freight.
Yeah, perhaps there's a growing awareness of this concept of being a shipper of choice.
Exactly.
Where you don't want to alienate that carrier when times get rough. Anyway, okay, I would like to bring in the audience at this point, because we do have some audience questions to answer. And even as we are answering them, audience, continue to submit those questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many of those as we can, time permitting. But let me start with this one, Frank. Sorry about that.
Let me start with this one. Bob, I can be Steve. If you need me to be Steve, I'll be Steve.
No, I like Frank. Frank's good. Anyway, historically, this questioner says, we have focused on application modernization and then integration. Seems that you are recommending the opposite approach. Why?
A great question. In the supply chain space, it's very sticky. We tend to hold on to things. And that makes sense, because that's how we make money. We buy and sell things. All of the other stuff is administration and marketing and development, whatever. We buy and we sell things. That's how we stay in business. So we're very reluctant to touch those processes and to touch the applications that power those processes. What we have seen, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, is this massive modernization that's happened from the application vendors themselves. And so whether it be some of the old established names in transportation management systems totally revamping their products and releasing new versions of their products that support modern technologies such as complex event processing, or supporting API usage, very simple API usage, and actually publishing standards and having communities, we're seeing more often than not the applications support that. So the modernization is happening within the vendors themselves. And so it's, hey, I'm leaving this transportation management system and I'm contracting with them, and then I'm going to take a half of a year to move it over. Well, we've seen enough of that. At this point, we have to start to think about integration, because the innovation, once you start to open that up, the innovation happens so fast that it's I need to leverage this investment in this real-time transportation visibility platform as soon as I possibly can in the most substantial way. I don't have time to figure out how to make it work and make it manual. I need to put in something for integration to snap them together.
Yeah.
So it's not as much of this is something nice to do. This is something that my shipper, my customer is telling me I need to support, and I need to support it in an automated, digitized way. So I just need to plug it in. And that's driving integration first.
Yeah. There's a reason why some of these longtime vendors have been around as long as they have, because they've always been willing to pivot successfully. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. This questioner is saying, hey, I get supply chain convergence in theory. But it's always been a theory. Why do you believe it's real this time?
I think that, Bob, what we've seen is that historically, innovation in integration. So we've seen innovation in traditional application integration or enterprise application integration. We've gone through integration brokerages and then integration application platform suites, and then we've seen enterprise service buses, and we've seen these big pieces of technologies that can automatically integrate with your internal applications. We are seeing a renaissance in how companies work with each other and work with each other over different formats and different standards and consuming and providing things in different ways. We have access to functionality that we quite frankly didn't have access to before because, once again, we didn't see the investment. And so now that we're starting to see the investment, we're starting to see just a new wave of technologies, both with what we're doing and what some of the other folks are out there doing. And it is just so exciting, and there's plenty of space there. So with this new renaissance, it gives us an idea of what if we took an outside approach? What if we assumed that we're not just living in our house, we're living on a block inside of a community, inside of a city? What if we took that approach first? Would that change how we plan? And has people are waking up and saying that would change how we plan? And so if we've got a kind of a centralized place that everything is feeding into, and we've got transformation, because with companies, we've always been speaking different languages, then we have the opportunity to rationalize the data in a standard format that I can understand what this means in the context of an order, in the context of inventory, in the context of a load, and in the context of an inventory, an invoice. Okay. And the hope is that the benefits that I get from that feed way back into the price that I get to charge, the price that I get to charge my buyers, that price comes down and there are benefits from it. So now we have a very real reason to do it that is not just selfish. It benefits us and we don't have to hire so many people. We can start to pass that around, and that means buying power, that means selling power, that means differentiation. And I think the association of that differentiation with supply chain convergence, that is the chef's kiss. That is the tipping point that we've been waiting for.
The chef's kiss. I like that. Thank you. Questioner says, what will it take to truly automate the invoice and remittance process in freight? When will we see solutions for lowering DSO, or day sales outstanding?
When we close the loop. And this is what we were talking about a little earlier. The fact that we still have so many humans in the process, it's a great thing. But it's what processes do we keep them in? And it's our belief that all of the things around what happens when the delivery is complete, what happens when the truck departs from where it's just dropped its shipment off, how do we start to digitize the proof of delivery? How do we start to do a better job at digitizing carrier invoicing to brokers so that we can properly and timely invoice the shippers? When we close the loop of what happens after things are dropped off, and we haven't done that today, and it's still very, very painful and very, very manual. But when we close off that loop, Bob, then that's when we'll start to see that accounts receivables, the invoicing group, can start to do things in a timely fashion, in a more accurate fashion, hint, see supply chain convergence. When we start to do so in an accurate fashion, when the order matches the load and it matches the invoice, then you'll see your invoices start to become accepted. And the kickbacks or the kickouts of invoices are going to start to become minimized. They're going to really be the exceptions. People are going to get paid a lot faster. That's going to reduce the day sales outstanding, and that's going to free up cash. That's going to free up capital. Those things are attractive to investment, and then that wonderful cycle starts where you start to get innovation. We're starting to see that, but that is the linchpin.
Especially the interest rates being what they are, jacking up the cost of capital. The degree to which you can free that up in your organization is just great. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, this questioner says, I'm on the distribution side of things, specifically food service, and this industry is extremely archaic in technology. What do you say about leading businesses away from legacy systems that can be holding them back, like an ERP, WMS, and the like?
This comes back to the conversation, Bob, that we were having about expectations. And the way that many of the big box retailers and the grocery outlets and the food distributor, the food companies, or where the food is being purchased from, there's so much innovation and so much revenue opportunities to have white label. There's so much opportunities to have, where a manufacturer or a retailer is in control of their own destiny. And point back to Aldi. And Aldi scares a lot of people because Aldi sells so many things that are white labeled, but has the CEO of Walmart put it on a talk that he did, I think earlier this year or late last year. He said, my problem is Aldi, because when I drive by it, I see Mercedes, I see BMWs, I see Infinities, I see Lexuses parked in that lot, and it is white label. So it's understanding the expectations of the consumer and what they have to, the grocery stores. And those expectations have to pull back into distribution. And what you find is that legacy enterprise resource planning and warehouse management systems, unfortunately, don't have the capacity to capture those metrics, don't have the processes, again, predictability and consistency, don't have the processes in place to ensure that that is happening. So if you are in distribution for refrigerated products, it used to be, well, I can just check the thermostat. Yep, it got to us and it's 28 degrees. Everything is still frozen. No, now you need to report out that every place that truck has been, it's maintained 28 degrees. It didn't jump up to 60, melted all the ice cream, and then jump back down to 28 because someone was able to get it going. And all of a sudden you're getting just bad product. Understanding those expectations that the end consumer has. I've opened up ice cream, as we all had, just to find out that at some point in the process it was melted. I broke the seal and it's horrible. Understanding those expectations and how we as consumers place those expectations on grocery stores, and then understanding how those grocery stores place those expectations on food distributors and wholesalers, and running those back and having the capacity to do that, you're going to have to modernize those systems. But you're still going to want to do business. And that's where integration comes in, because it allows you to modernize, but it also allows you to continue to do business, because you can start to route things and you can turn things into what they need to be.
Frank, I'm the bearer of bad news here. I have to say that we were almost out of time. I have time for just one final question. And here it is for you. Given the prescription or the understanding now that supply chain fragility can be addressed through a combination of new methodologies, approaches, and technologies, who in my organization should I be talking to for design and to kick off a supply chain agility or risk mitigation initiative?
Great question, Bob. And I like to think of it like this. We're doing this webinar, right before a weekend, and a weekend during the holiday season. Happy holidays, everyone. And to you, Bob, and the supply chain team. So Monday morning, I want everybody to go into Outlook or whatever you use and schedule a meeting with your technology team. Schedule a meeting with your sales team. Schedule a meeting with your procurement team. And when you schedule that meeting, start to map out, well, what is the business process? And then what is the technical process? And where are they differing? And where do I have manual things happening in places that I probably shouldn't? And by the way, where can I introduce human intervention so that I can get differentiation? The thing that I don't want you to do is just talk to your IT team. The thing I don't want you to do is just talk to your sales team. You have to bring them in together, and you'll find that sometimes they don't even know each other and they don't even know where those pain points are. But when you sit in front of a big whiteboard and you start to map out what is going on with what technologists want to go on, and then understanding what are the expectations, just seeing it on the whiteboard, the sparks will fly. And that's where you start, Bob.
Fantastic. Frank, thank you so much for a great presentation. And audience, thank you for your participation in attendance. Really appreciate that. It was some great information here.
Yeah.
I do want to offer a show. There is the opportunity to take a platform tour if you're interested in automating and orchestrating your critical business processes. We talked about like order to cash, load tender to invoice. There is a QR code for you to access that very thing. If you're unable to get an image of that right now, that will, of course, be sent to all attendees at the end of this presentation. And there is your contact URL for Clio as well, Clio.com. So, everybody, Frank Kenny, again, thank you very much. Thank you,
Bob.
audience. Happy holidays to all, and everybody, have a great day.